Hey everybody, welcome to the podcast. This is the Kick Shrink podcast, and this is your host, Dr. Salman Aziz Mirza. Finally figuring out how to do like a proper introduction instead of just a hey, welcome to the show. But we have a great guest, one of my favorite guests that we've had on the show so far, Dr. Kristen Casey. I'll give her introduction, and then we'll kind of jump on into the episode. Dr. Kristen Casey is a clinical psychologist, published author, and content creator. She's the founder and owner of a private practice and consultation company. Prior to her psychology career, she was an EMT for 5 years. Her clinical training focused on health psychology, which sparked her interest in sleep, anxiety, and dedication to utilizing modalities that are rooted in science and research. Dr. Casey is most known on social media for providing mental health and wellness content about insomnia, anxiety, and gender sexuality concerns. This was a great episode. We talked about sleep psychology and a lot of fun stuff with one of my favorite peoples on the internet. So enjoy. All right, everybody, welcome back to the podcast. I have a great guest on the show today. I have Dr. Kristen Casey on our show. I'm very, 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 very excited to have her on. She's one of my favorite peoples on the social media because we have like a similar wavelength of biting sarcasm kind of stuff. So
That's so true. Yeah.
so I'll let her introduce herself with like bio and background and all that stuff, and then we'll kind of jump on in.
Yeah, I thank you so much for having me on.
Yeah.
Big fan. And yes, when we're on social media in the wild together, it's always so fun. But I'm Dr. Kristen Casey. I'm a licensed clinical psychologist. I'm also a published author, and I'm a social media content creator for mental health stuff. So basically, a lot of my clinical interests include sleep, anxiety, and gender and sexuality. And I got on social media in 2020 during the pandemic because I was bored, and it just started from there. So that's kind of how I got here.
Yeah, I think we all kind of started like during the pandemic because we were bored and we're like, we need to connect with people and we need to like make some kind of friends because everybody's telling us to stay home and do nothing, right?
100%. Yeah.
Yeah. And then it was cool because like a lot of people, I was talking with like Dr. Jesse Gold about this, like one of my first episodes was like, this was, people are like, make fun of, they're like, oh, you have like Twitter friends and social media friends. And it's like, well, no, those connections are real. Like those, the connections you make, like turn into like, partnerships, right? Like I think we were just talking about before, like you guys started a podcast and that's there and this has started. And like, even with this whole podcasting thing that I'm doing, I was like, I joke about it. I was like, it's just really a selfish way for me to talk to people that I like.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah.
And then other people get to learn,
And then other people
just
get
by
something.
listening to conversations.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Awesome. Cool. All right. Well, first question, right? I always kind of start off with like a surprise question to throw out
Ready
there.
for it.
Who is your favorite UFC fighter?
I know you and I both watch UFC. So
I know.
to be honest with you,
Yeah.
I want to have a favorite,
Yeah.
but I don't really have one. I'm going to be real. I'm going to be real with you. So, and I'm not just using that as a cop out. So I do watch UFC.
Yeah.
But I feel like every fight that I watch, I tend to just pick a favorite within that match. And then I forget. I'm like, what's the next match? What's the next match? But Jones Bones was like, he's going to stay in my heart, but I'm undecided. What about you?
I'm a big fan of Kamaru Usman. Yeah, because I gotta I gotta represent like the Muslim Brotherhood out there.
Absolutely.
Yeah, because it's so like when I was younger, Muslim athletes like weren't a thing, right? It was like Hakeem Olajuwon. We got our couple of years when Jordan was retired of like Hakeem Olajuwon being like at the top of the NBA, and then before that was like Muhammad Ali, and then that was it.
And that's it. You're right. Actually, there's not much representation.
Yeah. So it was really cool. I mean, because it's just funny because like UFC is always seen as like this Donald Trump red supporter MAGA sport, and it was like we had that little period of time where it was like Francis Ngannou was a champ, and with Israel Adesanya was a champ, and Kamaru Usman were the champs. So we had like people represented out there, and we had all these like again the Brazilian and the Mexican fighters as champions, and it was like it's a very multicultural sport and really international, and yeah.
It really is. And every time I watch it, I feel
Khabib,
like,
yeah,
oh, Khabib, oh
yeah,
my gosh, yeah. I
yeah.
mean, I think there's so many different cultures represented, and I do think that there might be preconceived notions, like you said, about like, oh, it's just MAGA and all that. But when you really think about the culture of UFC too, they include a lot of people, a lot of
Oh
people.
yeah. I think that's like, I was trying to get my young kids to like get into it in
Mhm.
regards to more so like participating in it because
Yes.
I have three daughters now, and it's like,
Oh
one
my
of the,
gosh, you got your hands
I
full.
know. And I'm like, this, it's one of those things like as a child psychiatrist, I'm like, these girls need to know how to like handle them, unfortunately, right? Like,
Right.
like
Yeah.
they have to know how to like take care of themselves to an extent or be able to defend themselves. I'm just like, I want you guys to like learn how this stuff, if nothing else, just for like self-defense,
Oh
because
yeah.
we see all this stuff all the time. And I'm like, oh my God, I don't want to have kids in this world. And yeah,
It's scary.
it's
I
scary.
think, I'm not a parent, but
Yeah.
I feel like being a parent is such a vulnerable experience.
Yeah.
It's almost like you're taking a piece of your heart out and hoping the world treats them with kindness. It's really
Yeah.
tough.
And it's weird because I get like that terrible view because again, most of my work is with teens and adolescents, and of
Hmm.
course, the teens and adolescents are seeing who are either like depressed, suicidal, anxious,
Oh yeah,
traumatized, like they've gone through bad stuff, and I'm like, oh my God,
there it is.
okay,
Yeah, it's such an epidemic.
yeah. Well, on that note, but we'll get it on that uplifting note of like
Right.
how our UFC fandom kind of began, but um, tell us about. So I brought you on here because one of the reasons I wanted to talk to you because I've done an episode before on sleep medicine
Hmm.
with one of my old med school buddies, and he's a good friend of mine, and I love to sleep. My wife loves to sleep,
Hmm.
and we have our 4 kids, and our sleep is destroyed, and our lives are destroyed, and I'm just coming off Ramadan, which
Yeah.
of course, like, especially with the longer days, and now we're kind of like we're in that summerish, springish
Hmm.
kind of range of it, like sleep gets destroyed. And like in those last,
Yeah.
10 days or so, like my body was like literally like shutting down.
Yeah.
Like I was having like, not to get too graphic, but just terrible
Mhm.
like GI stuff.
No, it's
Like,
true. Yeah.
yeah, my body shut down. Like I lost like 10 pounds overnight. Just like I couldn't function. It was
Oh
like
my God.
terrible, right? Mentally, I was just like all over the place. So I was like, we need to like, I think that we don't put enough emphasis on what sleep is, right?
So true.
And the
Yeah.
impact that it has on us. And I was like, I came across your stuff, and I know you had just written the book, so I was like, we gotta connect about this part of stuff too.
Oh
So
yeah. It's
what?
you know what's so
Yeah.
okay.
Oh, I was just, I was like, what is sleep psychology?
Yeah, it's so interesting. Every time people ask me about sleep, it's just such a broad topic,
Hmm.
and sleep is everything in my mind. Sleep is the cornerstone of our mental health, our physical well-being. If you're not getting sleep, just like you said during Ramadan, I mean, it's just really difficult to feel like you could function, and sometimes when we think about sleep, we primarily think about what can I take to make me go to sleep, like sleep medications. And I'm a big, big, big fan of sleep medicine doctors because
Yeah.
they do great work. And I also think when we collaborate together, we also could even do better work. So when I think about sleep psychology, I think about what behaviors are you engaging in that actually help or harm your sleep. And really, the cornerstone of it is, in my mind, stress and anxiety. How do you manage your stress? How do you manage life transitions? How do you manage being out of control in certain areas of life? And how do you get to a point where you can actually sleep despite these things happening in real time?
Yeah. It's the old adage, right? It's like, we spend a third of our lives, we're supposed to spend a third of our lives in sleep, something like
Yeah,
that. And we don't again put the energy into it or put the
yeah,
kind of the thought into it. And there's so much of my work, right, as a psychiatrist, which is around sleep and sleep
yeah,
dysfunction. And a lot of times I was like, I know from our training, it's like people are like, oh, I'm sure you just throw medicines at them. And I was like, no, I don't
yeah,
want to throw medicine at them because I know that I'm not supposed to throw medicine at them, right?
yeah,
Unless of course there's some stuff you need to, but a lot
mhm,
of times like you don't want to. A lot of it comes down to, like you're
yeah.
saying, the anxiety and the stress and stuff. So
Yeah,
what,
it's tough.
yeah, what drew you to the field of it as a whole? So aside from kind of like what you're saying before.
Yeah, to be honest, it sounds like this is like my whole life, but by accident. So I
Yeah.
was doing my clinical internship at the Department of Veterans Affairs, and
Hmm.
I love working with veterans. I was working with trauma treatment. I was in primary care. It was like so fun. And one of my supervisors was really interested in sleep. She was like the sleep guru, and she would do all these cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia groups. And in my mind, I was never a good sleeper. I didn't know the first thing about sleep. I was just taking ZQuil to go to sleep at night. Like I had no idea about what to
Yeah.
do about sleep. And she's like, hey, I need you to run the sleep group. It's part of your clinical training. And I said, I'd rather choose something else. And she said, okay, see you tomorrow. And she made me run the sleep group. So the first 2 weeks, I was really open with the veterans. And I was like, I'm learning with you, like, you know, as I'm in supervision and all that stuff. And you know what it's like being under supervision. You're learning,
Yeah.
gaining hours. And I was like, let me do this treatment with them. Like, let me just try it. And I felt so much better. I was sleeping at night. I felt so much better. Obviously, depending on, you know, your clinical presentation, if you have PTSD and stuff, it might take a little longer, but it started there. And I just fell in love. Like, I just fell in love with the fact that people were getting better. They were getting better sleep. They were spending more time with their partners. You see them light up. I mean, it was just such a beautiful journey. And since then, I've just always had an interest in helping people, notably with insomnia. There's over 70 sleep disorders. So that's kind of where it started.
Yeah. And it's interesting you talked about like CBTI, cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia. You know, when I'll kind of like reveal like a little secretish kind of thing almost, right? So when ChatGPT like first started out, right, I was like, you know, and I think I had just kind of come across, and I was like, let me play with this thing, right, and really see what the possibilities of it are. I decided to like write a book, basically manualized like CBTI manual, right?
That is so cool.
Yeah. And I was like, oh my God, first of all, I was like, AI can do this for me,
Yeah.
right? it can like write this thing out. And so of course, it's not just a copy paste job, right? You go through it and you have to like fix stuff and edit things and blah, blah, blah. And I was like, this is the first time like I really came across like what CBTI is as well. But I was like, there's so much of the stuff, which is like, we know the things, right? We know so much of the CBT insomnia techniques and skills that you're supposed to do, but we just don't do them.
100%.
We just,
100%. Yeah, you described it beautifully. I mean, I think we're all pretty smart humans. You know, we know what we have to do. I think we're usually in this controversy of, I know what I need to do for my health and well-being, but a lot of people don't see the priority in sleep. And I think it just is based on sleep history. The first theories about sleep included that sleep was like a passive process, that nothing really happened. I think it kind of stems from that.
Yeah. Expand on that like a little bit more if you could. Yeah.
Yeah. So really, really, really early on, I mean, we're still learning so much about sleep in the brain, as you know, right? So when we think about sleep and the theories, a lot of people, they thought that people would just go to sleep for 8 hours and wake up and nothing was happening during this time. And then as we were learning more about like brain waves and all these scans and stuff, we actually saw like electrical activity and like all these things happening overnight. And people started, well, not people, researchers started to, sorry, I don't want to undermine them. They're doing great work, but researchers started to realize like there's so much going on during sleep, like memory consolidation, temperature regulation, like all these homeostatic properties that happen. And the more research that we have, the more knowledge we have. But I still think that people have these preconceived notions of like, I'll sleep when I'm dead, or I don't need a lot of sleep, or I could catch up on sleep. And none of those are true. They're just myths. And I think we want to lean into those because we're hustle culture in America, you know, speaking just for Americans here, we don't want to sleep because we want to be productive. So
yeah, it's like Nas said, I never sleep because sleep is the cousin of death, right?
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's the whole thing. What you said there was over 70 sleep disorders. What's the most common ones that you kind of come across and see? And I think you said insomnia, but yeah, tell me about that.
Yeah, in my clinical practice, and just for reference for listeners, I'm a clinical psychologist, so I don't prescribe meds. I work with people on behavioral changes and processing emotions and stuff like that. But when we think about evidence-based treatments, I do cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia. I also work with people with CPAP adherence, so people who have sleep apnea and they're struggling to keep the CPAP on.
Yep.
Those are the two major ones. Sometimes we have circadian rhythm disorders, advanced phase sleep syndrome, things like that, where people's desired bed window isn't in line with their circadian rhythm, which is their sleep-wake cycle. And we kind of do some behavioral changes to get them to a place where they feel comfortable falling asleep and staying asleep during certain times.
Can you tell me a little bit more about that, like matching? Because I know this is one of the big things that comes up is matching the circadian rhythm to our sleep-wake cycles, right? Because people are like, well, I can't go to sleep at this time. And people are like, well, why don't you just go to sleep at this time? Let's just lay in bed at this time. And it's one of those like, you know, Yeah, expand on that a little bit more. I'll let you talk about
Yeah,
that.
no, it's a great conversation, and everybody is so different with this.
Mm-hmm.
So there are, you've heard of like night owls and
Yeah.
like morning people. So some people just have a natural inclination and tendency to maybe be on one end of the spectrum or not. And when we think about the 9 to 5, that's technically, from society, right? It's not because of
Yep.
our bodies. We
Nope.
normally operate that way. So for some people, they fall asleep late and wake up late and they just feel great. For some people that fall asleep at 1 a.m. and wake up, at 9 or 10, they just feel on fire. They're like, this is where my body is. And for some people, it's the opposite. So usually when we're changing that, it's because of work obligations or social obligations or relationship obligations. And
Yeah.
we do a lot of talking and conversation and processing around you might have to give up certain things when it comes to sleep. You might have to give up going out with your friends or actually working a traditional job if you have the privilege and opportunity to do so. If not, we always try to help people get back there. But it could be genetic, it could be mental, it could be societal expectations, it could be so many different things. And usually when we look at it, I look at it from a very individualized circumstance, just like you do with your clients of like, this client might have insomnia, but what does it mean for them in the grand scheme of things? It's not just their inability to fall asleep.
Yeah. And it's that aspect where like, again, everything is individualized and having to kind of match those things up. And like, I was joking before, like I know I'm typically someone who's like a later riser. I tend to stay up a little bit later. Like I remember like a period of time, like during my fellowship, like in the last 6 months or so of my fellowship, I was going to like try to get up in the morning. I was inspired by the Rock's Instagram
Yeah.
posts of like going to the gym at like 4 a.m. in the morning and then starting the day off like that. And I was like, all right, we're going to do this. And I did it for like 3 days, right? Because I woke up in the morning and I went to the gym and I worked out and I felt great and it was fantastic. And then it was 10 a.m.
And you're miserable and you're
and
falling
then I was
asleep
done. I was
during
done.
during
Yeah.
fellowship, the most demanding time. Yeah.
Yeah. I was like seeing patients. I was like, I cannot function right now.
Yeah.
I was like, I've already been awake for 6 hours. Like, no, I'm done.
It's
No.
wild. Yeah,
Yeah.
because our body's sleep drive. I mean, when we wake up in the morning, our sleep drive is really high because hopefully we have slept.
Yeah.
And then usually around 6 or 7 hours later, we start to feel it.
Yeah.
It's hard.
Yeah. So like again, trying to, when we're trying to like match up people and, mating wise and all that stuff, like you want to ideally have some kind of match with what your sleep wake up schedules are and then work wise too, right? Kind of like what you're saying, because I see this a lot of times with college kids who struggle when they're like, I can't, function. I'm not doing well because I'm staying up later and I'm getting up later. And then they build their schedule around it and then they do better. They thrive, right?
It's so true. And I think a lot of young people now, this isn't a clinical term by any means, but
Yeah.
revenge bedtime procrastination, right?
Yep.
They
Yep.
have been in school all day, which is so demanding. I don't know how we used to do it. I mean, even high
Yeah.
school is torture. And then you get out and you just want to have fun.
Yeah.
And then you're up until 2 a.m. and then you have to wake up at 6. It's hard.
Yeah, it was, and again, I say that from like even experience last night. Like I was taking care of the kids, and then I was up till 1 or something in the morning, making sure that the newest one had her milk and stuff, because I was like, and then I had to watch the basketball game too. I had to watch the Warriors destroy the Lakers, so
Yep.
of course, that was what I needed to do, and then I had to
Priorities.
play. I had to play my game on my phone at night. So the next thing I know, it's like 2 in the morning, right?
Yeah, it's hard. And I think for parents, it's even harder because you have such limited opportunities for solo time.
Yeah, and we all need that. We all need that
Yep.
solo time. So how does this then, so I know we were talking before, like how anxiety, depression impact sleep. How does sleep impact anxiety, depression, and other mental health stuff?
Oh, that's a really good question. So when we have depression, anxiety, and I'll just look at anxiety for now. When we
Yeah.
have anxiety, we have this persistent worry and anticipation of future events, or you might not be able to stop thinking about certain things, and it becomes really difficult to control that worry. And when you have difficulty controlling that worry, your brain is still firing its neurons, doing all the things, and it's not really concerned about sleep at
Yeah.
all because it's concerned about survival. Your brain is there to keep you safe, not to keep you happy. So if you're really trying to think about all the things and all the embarrassing moments from 10 years ago that might not make a difference right now as you're laying in bed, your brain is going to stay up. And we call that an insomnia treatment. We call it hyperarousal, just the inability to turn off your brain. And I notice a lot of people, especially notably younger people now, really struggle with that because they don't have time throughout the day to allow their brains to process. So if you do have anxiety, it might impact sleep. It doesn't always impact everybody's sleep. With depression, it's usually one or the other for people. They're either sleeping too much for them or not enough. And the not enough sleeping, it could be because of thoughts, emotions, general angst, and things like that. But when people come to me for insomnia treatment, I always ask them, what other things are you dealing with? Take insomnia out of it. What's your life like? What are your issues? And a lot of the times when we focus on anxiety and depression, sleep usually remits over time, like insomnia. So
yeah, my buddy who I talked to, the sleep medicine doctor, again, like he was saying that same kind of thing. We'd always kind of like curbside each other and be like, hey, what do I do in this situation?
Yeah.
And he's like, I'm prescribing like antidepressants. I'm prescribing all this stuff that like I wasn't thinking I was going to have to. And I'm talking to my patients about like their life stuff. And he's like, he'd message me. He's like, man, I can't see, this, the common kind of thing when people are in the mental health field, it's like, and other people are like, oh, I can't see how you do this all day. Right. I can't see how people can come to you and tell you their problems all day. And it's like, yeah, that's what
kind of the whole point. Yeah.
That's what we do. That's our thing.
Yeah.
So
it's so true. And everybody's so unique. And I don't know, I almost feel like I'm a different psychologist with every client, because every client has different, not only presenting concerns, you have to think about culture, the intersectionality between all these different things, socioeconomic status, race, all this. And stressors, I think, in my opinion, are the biggest culprit for insomnia.
Yeah.
How people manage and deal with stress.
Yeah. What are some things so benefits and risks, I guess, of too little sleep, too much sleep? What are some things that kind of happen with that?
Yeah, it of course depends on the person, but if you're sleeping too much, then sometimes there could be an underlying medical concern. That I always say, hey, if you're sleeping too much, please get labs done, just to see, because I'm not a MD or DO by any means. So I always say, hey, get some labs done. Let's make sure it's nothing else hormonal or anything like that.
Yeah.
But when people are sleeping too much, normally the concern is that they aren't able to make the obligations that they've already previously said, hey, I'll be there, or I could work on this day, or something like that. And usually they struggle with those things. If you're not sleeping enough, then normally when you are attending these events, you are just absolutely exhausted and you're just operating on empty. And it's really hard to just function, process, like everything, attention. If you've ever missed a night of sleep, you've been on fellowship in grad school, like just pulling all-nighters, trying to get assignments done and all that stuff. The next day you're just shot. You might be able to function, but you're not optimal by any means. And the risks of sleeping less, in my opinion, are more than sleeping more, and unless there's an underlying medical concern. Because when we think about short sleep, which is anything under 6 hours for a chronic period of time, we notice, long-term health issues, cardiovascular issues, issues with physical functioning, things like that. Because you can't really catch up on sleep. Your body needs that optimal range, depending on your age, each day to do what it needs to do overnight.
Yeah, I always kind of say, like, with my patients, when they try to shortchange sleep, is like, sleep is resting and rest is short for restoration.
Yes.
And it's like our body needs to restore itself. And if we don't allow that to happen, then the body falls apart.
It's so true.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's so true. I mean, when you're sleep deprived, I mean, even if we think about sleep deprivation for like 24, 48, 72 hours, I mean, people start to hallucinate. I mean, it's really scary.
People die, right? I think I was listening. Yeah, I was
Yeah.
listening to some other podcast. I think Kaveh Hoda's the House of Pod, and he did that recently. And again, that was what Michael Jackson essentially died of, right?
Yeah, that's what I heard. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think it was just because he was chronically he was getting propofol to go to sleep, and propofol doesn't, it puts you to sleep, but it doesn't put you to like proper sleep. It doesn't get you into the right restorative stages of sleep. So your body's not repairing itself. You're knocked out, but you're not like restoring. And that's what essentially killed him over time was that whole thing.
It's so sad. Yeah, because I think we think, and again, medications are super useful and helpful. And when we're thinking about chronic insomnia, like insomnia that's over 3 months, at least 3 times a week, you're really, really struggling to fall asleep, stay asleep, or you're waking up really dissatisfied with your sleep. At that point, medications could be a good help, and we need behavioral changes. Because at one point, I always tell my clients, like, what if you lose your job and you can't afford the medication? Now what? I mean, you obviously have bigger problems, but we want to be able to rely on ourselves too.
Yeah. Yeah. What is the impact of, I know we referenced it a little bit earlier, but like the modern world, the go culture of nonstop American culture of doing everything?
Oh my gosh. I feel like that's the biggest culprit.
It's all capitalism, right?
It's all capitalism.
It's all capitalism.
It really, really is, because I think and this is just my personal opinion,
Yeah.
it's not based on any research, so I just like to preface that. But I think when we're really trying to fit into the societal norm, some people are working two jobs. They have kids, they have childcare, they're juggling multiple roles, and just to make ends meet. So if you think about just poverty levels and just all those things, being able to work and actually afford your
Mm-hmm.
house and afford to live, it's a big price. If just say you don't have the opportunities. So I do think that people are struggling to even just make ends meet. And in that way, it impacts sleep. And it's because of our societal norms. And that's really hard. That's
Yeah.
really hard.
I don't disagree with it. Right. Like I know I have like my main job that I have my private practice gig and then,
Mhm.
we're making enough money and stuff, but like
Mhm.
there are people who are not, right. They're on the opposite
Right.
spectrum, where like they have to do it. And then like, when I'll be talking to them, I'll be like, well, you need to like reduce your work hours. You need to go to sleep a little bit more. And they're like, well, then I can't live in this house that I have.
Yeah, how am I going to pay my mortgage?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really sad because I think the one thing that I talk about in my book is the uncontrollables. Like people aren't acknowledging. Well, some people aren't acknowledging like the uncontrollable stressors that they have because it's so painful because there's no solutions. If there's solutions, people would take those solutions. But I think the society that we live in really paints the picture of poor sleep.
Yeah.
Other countries, in my opinion, don't struggle as much as we do. So
Yeah. There's definitely more of a pressure in this
mhm,
culture to do that. So
yeah.
coming to sleep a bit more. One of the big things as we hear is sleep hygiene. And there, I wrote in our notes, right? Because
I
like
know, I saw that.
because everyone, again, like we know this stuff and we hate it. And people are like, I know the sleep hygiene stuff. I do the
Mhm,
sleep hygiene things. Talk about that like a little bit in regards to like, what does sleep hygiene mean? And then like, why is there such a pushback to it?
mhm, mhm. Yeah, sleep hygiene is basically, nutshell version
Hmm.
is reducing screen time, not taking naps, waking up at the same time every day, reducing stressors, like all like the basics that you could do for your sleep. And I think there is pushback because it's just kind of like you put a band-aid on something and hope it heals, sort of thing. It doesn't really fix the underlying origin of the issues, which is what we've been talking about. And I think sleep hygiene could be super helpful and useful if you're looking to make some small changes to your sleep
Hmm.
schedule and stuff. But in my opinion, not everybody has these opportunities to wake up at the same time every day. Not everybody has the opportunity to reduce their stress. I mean, we're dealing with so much. So I think sleep hygiene is kind of sometimes laughable for people, although it's super useful and helpful if you're
Yeah.
able to implement these things, but not everybody can.
Yeah. And screen time, technology time, talk about that a little bit because we end up like in these situations where we're doom scrolling on Twitter and
Hmm.
the never ending, Instagram that we see the jokes and the memes all the time of like, oh, let me just check my post and then it's 7 a.m., right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, when we think about the rigidity of CBTI or the rigidity of any manualized treatment program, it's always
Hmm.
like, hey, avoid these things and do these things, right? But when I think about it, screen time, of course, will keep us up because what happens in our brain, our suprachiasmatic nucleus is in our hypothalamus, and that regulates our sleep-wake cycle. And it's regulated by exposure to light and consistency. So if you wake up bright and early in the morning and you expose yourself to light, melatonin secretion stops and your brain is like, okay, we're good.
Yeah.
And then at night you reduce the light and your brain gets the hint because think about hunter-gatherer days. If we're looking at that theory, the rise and fall of the sun, that's kind of when we went to bed and when we woke up. So when I tell people, hey, reduce your screen time in bed, they're like, but what am I going to do? That's really the problem is, hey, what am I going to fill this time with? I have to be alone with my thoughts. What does
Yeah.
that mean for
Yeah.
me? So I do tend to take a flexible approach of if you are on your phone in bed, of course, ideally, try not to, and create a burner account on Twitter where it's only happy things. You aren't like aimlessly scrolling on the For You page or Explore page. You're very, very specific about your content from just a harm reduction approach. And people tend to take to that well.
Yeah.
And I always say, like, you're still on screen. So you might not fall asleep the way that you want to as we kind of navigate your thoughts and stuff like that. So I don't think it's necessarily a terrible thing, but it's how you're using it. Like you said, with the doom scrolling, it's probably not helpful.
Yeah. Because Twitter is a hellhole, right? it,
It
it
is.
it can become this hellhole where you get in there and you get like agitated and worked up
Oh,
and
yeah.
get into the arguments and posting and all this other stuff.
Yeah,
So,
and I think sometimes it's non-consensual. And I think it's really important for people to know that. Like if you're on just any explore page or just like a home page, you're scrolling and maybe you're following these people and maybe you're not. And you didn't expect to see like this mass shooting at midnight as you're in bed, so.
Yeah. And I think like with the algorithm being all this stuff of like, oh, you may be interested in this stuff.
Yeah,
And it's
yeah.
like, no, I'm not, I don't want to. Like, just because somebody who kind of agitates you right there.
Yeah,
I think
exactly.
like I've been a little bit caustic online a little bit and making some enemies here and there. But like, it's something like stuff will show up, right? And you're just like, oh, now I have to deal with this at like 12
Yeah.
at midnight. And I'm like, oh, what do I do? And it's like, it's hard to just sleep on it, right? It's hard to just leave
It
it, let it
is.
go.
Yeah, because there's no solution. I mean, you're watching something or seeing something or reading something, and then you're scrolling, and then your brain is still thinking of those things. It's not like it just goes away.
Yeah. Yeah. And naps. Naps is one of those tricky kind of things, right? Because they can
Yeah.
be good when they're done correctly,
Mhm.
and then they can be terrible when they're not done correctly, right? So
Yeah.
what is an ideal nap, and what is not a nap?
Yeah. Depends on your sleep goals. If you want consolidated sleep at night, we always suggest reducing naps to, I call them safety naps. So 30 minutes or less if you are driving or you're caring for your child or something like that, and you really need some restoration. We usually try to cap it at 30 minutes so that you don't go into a full sleep cycle and confuse your brain and body.
Yeah.
If, again, you have the opportunity and you want that consolidated sleep at night, meaning like the full like 7 to 9 hours if you're an adult. For some people, they might not be able to do that. So they might have two separate sections of sleep where they're napping a little longer throughout the day and then they're sleeping less at night. But it's all about your expectations. So if you're napping throughout the day and then you're really frustrated with yourself that it's 10 p.m. and you can't fall asleep, well, your sleep drive's not that high. So you might have to adjust your expectations.
Yeah. Yeah. I like the 20-30 minute nap kind of deal.
Yeah.
I was like making sure there's just no Googles or Alexas here, but I always say like, Alexa, wake me up in 20 minutes or 30 minutes.
Great.
And and I always kind of tell people when they sleep, when they do the nap, it's like nap in a place that's not your bed.
100%.
Right. So
Yeah.
like either a couch or sleep like in a different position, like usually, so that's part of it, right? So like, I know that I'm like a side sleeper. So if I'm going to take a nap, I'm gonna be like, I'll lay on my back. Right. Just so
Exactly.
I know that's a little bit different. I'll be like on the couch versus like my bed. And again, let Alexa know to wake me up in 25 minutes or something like that.
Perfect. Yeah,
And
because
that,
there's this cognitive pairing that happens with our bed too. Like we
yeah.
pair, hopefully, in a perfect world, you pair your bed with sleepiness instead of like anxiety and stress and wakefulness. And sometimes if you're in your bed, then your body's going to be like, oh, well, we're done
Here
for
we
the
go.
day. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. What are some myths? I know sleep myths that are out there that maybe need to be explored or busted.
Oh,
Some of
the
your
one
favorite ones.
one of my favorite ones, I mean, there's the obvious ones like 8 hours.
Yeah.
It's not 8 hours, it's a range, and it
Yeah.
depends on your age, medical conditions, sex assigned at birth, all those things. But the one thing that I've been thinking about a lot lately is alcohol. Some people think like, hey, I'll have a drink or two and it'll help me fall asleep. Your body is just processing a toxin, and you're not really sleeping as well as you think that you are. Same goes for diphenhydramine, which is Equal or Benadryl. If you take that at night, sometimes people say, oh, it's the best night of sleep ever, which you might wake up feeling rested. But again, with the restorative sleep that you were talking about before, your body might not always get into those deep stages of sleep and do the things it needs to do. And then the last one is the whole like, I could catch up on sleep, because if you think about it, just say you're sleeping Monday through Friday, you're sleeping, I don't know, 7 hours instead of the normal 8. I'm just throwing this out.
Yeah.
You have 1 hour of sleep debt per day, so that's 5 hours. And then you might want to catch up on Saturday. I mean, 8 plus 5. I mean, are you really going to be able to sleep all that time? And
No.
is it really going to be helpful and effective?
Yeah. Talk about, I mean, like, so it's interesting. I do a lot of work with alcohol and substances as well. And I think, and again, if you're comfortable or want to say, like, I think I was seeing that you had kind of given up alcohol or reduced your own personal alcohol a little bit.
Yeah.
Talk about that if you don't mind.
Yeah. So basically in college, I felt like, oh my gosh, I have to drink just like everybody else. I was very unintentional with alcohol use. Never had any major issues, but I just was like, why am I doing this? It's not really helping me. So I do tend to take like a sober, curious lifestyle. So if I am going to go out with friends and have a drink, it's only during happy hour or lunch because I don't want it to impact my sleep. I'm usually like a 1 or 2 glasses of wine sort of person and put it down. Whereas in the past, I just didn't know that it was going to impact my sleep and my health and my well-being because I was just so tired for so many years. So when I decided to reduce my alcohol intake, I felt kind of weird because I'm like, I could easily go without this. Like I don't have like an active addiction, and at the same time, I'm still drinking it every now and then. Like, what's that about? So the more that I thought about it, the more that I realized it was really a societal habit that was kind
Hmm.
of like, you see commercials all the time for like wine and, all these different alcohols. And I was just thinking about all the research and how there's really no health benefits to alcohol. And I'm like, I'm putting like a toxin in my body. Like, what am I doing? And it really does impact sleep. You wake up more, temperature regulation's off, your body's processing a toxin and not really doing what it has to do overnight. So I really started to think about how it impacted my sleep, and I feel so much better. Um, I feel so
Yeah.
much better.
Again, like one of the other hats I work is with like addiction stuff and alcohol. I
Nice.
love working with alcohol.
Yeah.
I think, we don't, kind of like you're saying, is we've normalized it in our
Hmm.
culture. It's ingrained in the culture over here, is that like alcohol is a part of life, right? Happy
Yeah.
hours and et cetera. All that stuff is like just the American culture.
Hmm.
And, we get the headlines come from like the opioid crisis
Yes.
and Adderall shortages and Xanaxes and blah, 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 and fentanyl, right? But when you stack up the actual numbers, right,
Hmm.
and you combine them, and everything is like, you combine all the non-alcohol substances and then you compare them to alcohol, alcohol still is far and away the greatest negative impact on health to compared to anything else.
Wow, I didn't
Like
even know that.
yeah, it is. It's like not even a comparison almost. So like when I put
Wow.
like the bar graphs, like, there'll be times I'll make a bar graph, and like
Yeah.
the alcohol is like, this, it takes up the entire graph, the entire
Yeah.
y-axis, and then everything else is like here.
Yeah.
It is.
Wow. We are
Yeah.
so conditioned to just, and we could go on and on about this, but I
Yeah.
do think advertising and all that has something to
Hmm.
do with it.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we saw what happened to cigarettes, right? When we
Yeah.
started to crack down on that stuff went away. And then, of course, it turned into vaping, but now
Hmm.
but that's a whole other thing. But yeah, no, alcohol has this huge impact. We know that it had the impact that it has on sleep, because again, it can help you get to sleep,
Hmm.
but you're waking up in the middle of the night because you're peeing, or
Hmm.
your body's processing it, and then it just disrupts sleep. Again, you're not getting the quality sleep. And a lot of my patients who struggle with alcohol stuff, it's from sleep issues,
It
right?
is, yeah. And I mean, if we just think about temperature regulation
Hmm.
and think about if you have like, imagine yourself having like a drink or a couple of drinks and how you might get flushed, your body's
Yeah.
just processing it, and overnight, normally people drop, I think it's like, I'm trying to think about the clinical research. I think it's like
Hmm.
1 or 2 degrees overnight. I could be
Yeah.
wrong. I'll
Yeah.
get back to you on that. Um, so with alcohol, it's just harder to regulate that, and you might not sleep that well.
Yeah. You don't. All right. It's just what happens. So,
Yeah.
all right. Any other kind of like myths or things that in the sleep world that are pet peeves, I guess, that are out there for
Um,
you?
Melatonin.
Yeah. Let's talk about melatonin.
Oh my goodness. I could go on and on, but basically, it's not FDA regulated. We don't
Yeah.
really know 100% what's in it, the amount, all that stuff. And when we think about FDA regulation, it could be really helpful so we know exactly what's in it. And when we think about melatonin, we create it in our bodies naturally. So whenever we take a pill, it's exogenous
Hmm.
melatonin. And our
Yeah.
body sees it as real melatonin, but then that wears off. And then we wake up and we have all these issues. People have crazy dreams. And it's really, there's not much publicity about the fact that it could have really poor interactions. You know more about this for people with SSRIs because sometimes
Yeah.
it's cut with serotonin. So serotonin syndrome is always on my mind. It's just not super helpful all of the time. But I do hear stories about people who say, yeah, I take this amount of melatonin and I'm good. And hey, if it works, it works.
Yeah.
I'm kind of hands off with it. But if people are kind of focused on it and they're not getting the results, there's reasons why. Um,
Yeah, and I think that's a really important thing, like you brought up about like the FDA regulation and how inconsistent it is,
mhm.
because there is none, right? There
Yeah.
is all the supplements. It's the wild, wild west of
Mhm.
supplements out there. There is no kind of consistency at all between the brands. So like
Yeah.
5 milligrams with one brand is not 5 milligrams with another brand, like at all.
So true.
So when people start, like have people who come to me, they're like, I'm on like 20 milligrams of melatonin. It's not working for me. I'm like, oh my God. First of all, I was like, first of all, what the hell are you doing? Yeah.
Yeah.
I was like, the hell are you doing right now?
Yeah.
But I was like, you should have known at like 10 that like this isn't working.
Exactly.
And but
Yeah.
people don't know that, right? People don't have
They
that
don't.
guidance, right?
They
And there's
don't.
no kind of education out there that like 20 milligrams of melatonin is way more than you should be at.
Yeah. And when I think about the behavioral changes that people make, and even medications,
Yeah.
prescription medications that people could take for sleep, it really helps you get more in touch with your sleep cues. And if you're waking up, just say perfect world situation, you're
Yeah.
waking up at the same time every day, you'll have melatonin secretion hopefully around that same time every day too, if you're consistent. So you might not need it, but if
Hmm.
you're browsing the aisles in a grocery store and you see melatonin for sleep, who wouldn't
Yeah.
pick it up if they're having sleep issues? I get it.
Yeah. Yeah. What are your thoughts on dreams? Are you a
Oh.
dream believer? I think if I remember correctly, and you can correct me, like I've seen like your tattoos of your arms, and
Mhm.
I think they're dream catchers on there. Am I right or wrong?
No, it's
Okay.
it's yeah, it's mostly like flowers and other
Okay.
things.
Okay. Maybe I'm
Yeah,
wrong. Okay.
mostly just for fun. People
Okay.
are like, "What does it mean?" I'm like, "Tattoo, all tattoos have to have meaning." But anyways, I'm not a dream expert. One of
Yeah.
my friends is, but when I think about the concept of dreams, and this isn't validated by research by any
Sure.
means, it's
Sure.
just my thought,
Just for fun.
is I think that we dream as we're processing information throughout the day, and people might be like, "Well, why was my dream like I was a shark somewhere? Like, what does that mean?" And it might have underlying meanings. You might not turn into a shark, obviously, but
Hmm.
it might mean like you're in murky water and like you feel like you're attacked, whatever. I'm making this
Yeah.
up. But
Yeah.
I think dreams can inform us about what's going on in our inner psyche. And I think it's helpful. It could also be terrifying and
Yeah.
scary to think about our dreams.
Especially when we deal with like trauma stuff, right?
Oh
And
my
then
gosh, yes,
yeah, then we
yes.
we go switch from the dream world to the nightmare world, which
Hmm.
is not ideal. So
Yeah, and a couple of my colleagues work with nightmare disorders. I don't,
mhm.
but what they tell me is that the more that they process in therapy, the less that these nightmares have an impact on them. And I guess when we think about trauma treatment, it's pretty similar. Um,
Yeah, yeah, it's the manifestation, right? So
yeah.
panic attacks and functional neurological disorders, all that stuff is again like our body, our psyche kind of telling us something's wrong,
Hmm.
right? So the nightmares is again another avenue of like our body, our mind telling us something's going on.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And I mean, we don't really know much about the utility of dreams or why they
Hmm.
happen still. I mean, we're still
Yeah,
researching. And the Stanford University, um, I'm gonna, I don't even remember the name of it, but it
yeah,
was
it's
like the
okay.
first sleep clinic. And they're still really trying to figure out what dreams mean and why we have them and what happens and all of that. And I just think it's really cool to think about, different dreams and maybe the meanings. And I'd always encourage people to keep a dream journal and
Yeah.
just look back on it and just kind of see what happens.
Yeah. It's one of those things, right? Like I think we get asked this question from people, right? Either our clients, patients, or like
Hmm.
even lay people, like, I had this dream. What does it mean? And like
Yeah.
people think that we like, spend all of our training, analyzing
Right.
dreams like
It's
Freud
so
back in the day.
true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was
I
like, I don't
mean,
know.
yeah. I mean, from a psychoanalytic or psychodynamic
Yeah.
perspective, I could understand that, and there's the interpretation of dreams from Freud and all that. And, it
Yeah.
depends on what you believe in. So,
Yeah. Yeah. So I think it's always like a fun jump into like fancy to kind of like go,
yeah.
Maybe it means something. Maybe it means
Yeah.
this.
Who
Who knows?
knows?
Who
Yeah.
knows? Maybe. What do
Yeah.
you think it means? And I always
Right.
kind of turn it back and all the classic trick of like turning it back on our patients, right?
I
So
love it. I love it.
you had mentioned like sleep medicine. So like yeah, other thoughts on like sleep medicine kind of like as a field and then just like as like the actual pills that are there.
Yeah, yeah. So I'm definitely pro sleep medicine. I think
Hmm.
it again depends on the client's goals. Some clients are like, I just want to go to sleep at night. Just give me whatever,
Hmm.
I just want to go to sleep. Other people want the med and they want to make behavioral changes, and some people just don't want meds. So it just
Yeah.
depends. In the psychology world, when we just think about insomnia, CBTI is the first line treatment for chronic insomnia above medications. So
Yeah.
if people are experiencing insomnia for a really long period of time, of course, medication will help you feel better, but it might not fix the underlying problem. If you have acute insomnia, like jet lag, or I moved into a new house and I
Yeah.
can't sleep tonight, over the counter medications or even sleep medications are usually clinically indicated. So whenever I talk with clients, I always say, it doesn't really matter about my opinion, but what do you want for your life? Do you want to be on a medication forever, or do you want to make behavioral changes? Either works for me. And if
Yeah.
they want the medication, I'll usually refer out.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you were saying before, like the VA is huge on CBTI.
Yes.
They have like their own
Yeah.
app and everything like that
Hmm.
because they don't want to be giving out medicines all the time. So
Yeah, they when I was working for the VA, I did my internship postdoc and I was a staff psychologist there for a bit.
Yeah.
And for the veterans that didn't want to go through the CBTI program, they were normally prescribed trazodone. And that was their drug out there, at least at
Yeah.
the VA that I worked at. And some
Yeah.
people found it to be helpful and other people didn't. So it just
Yeah.
depends.
It's hit or miss, like I mean, like any other medicine. So
Hmm.
let's pivot away from sleep and
Hmm.
then let's talk about content creation. I know one of the things that we love more than anything else is live, laugh, love mentality.
Gosh, I saw it in the notes and I was like, oh my gosh.
I was like, we have to talk about it.
We have to talk about Live, Laugh, Love. Yeah, it's crazy. Whenever I think about Live, Laugh, Love, I just think of toxic positivity, and I'm like, it
Yeah.
just doesn't help anybody. Um,
It is. It's like obnoxious almost, right? Because
right.
you see the people out there, and people are like, "Oh, just choose live, love, love, and then you'll be all good." And
Yeah.
just decide to do this, and then the signs and all that other stuff, and it's like out of control.
It is. It is because I think it undermines people's struggle.
Hmm.
I mean, it could work for some people, and I tend to notice that, just only focusing on the positive and all of that really works for people who have inherent privilege because they don't have to worry about other things. But
Yeah.
if you're thinking about just the daily struggle of most humans, most Americans, especially people of color, especially people from diverse backgrounds, I mean, it's really hard to live, laugh, love.
Yeah.
And it's hard to expect people to do that too.
Yeah. It's like not to be racist a little bit, but it's like it's the rich white suburban
Of course it is.
housewife kind of trope, right? Of live, laugh,
100%.
love.
100%. Not racist at all. It's very
Yeah.
accurate.
It's
Yeah, 100%.
yeah. I was trying to like before this like getting a sign so I could burn it, but I was unable to just for this occasion to find a sign
You know
sign
what?
and burn it.
What's so funny is I went to one of my colleagues' homes recently and really new
Yeah.
acquaintance and stuff, and they invited me to their friend's house. So we went, and the first thing I see when I walk in is Live, Laugh, Love. And my colleague looked at me, and I looked at them, and I was like, "Are they cool?" And they're like, "Promise they're cool." I was like, "Okay, that sign's got to go." But yeah, it was just funny because I don't
It's
think people realize the underlying meanings of it. I tend to laugh about it.
yeah, it is kind of like this judge of character almost, right? Because
Mhm.
you can tell right from with the vibes. We can tell the vibes from the
Yeah,
person, right?
yeah. And am I going to feel safe with this person? Yeah.
I think you're just gonna tell me to be like, don't worry about everything.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's almost like you're really worked up and somebody just tells you to relax and you're like, "Oh yeah, I haven't thought about that,"
Just calm down.
Yeah, just chill.
Just don't worry about it. It'll be okay. Don't worry about it.
Yeah.
And then like your own kind of like content creation in regards to like the memes and stuff, like
Mhm.
talk about that a little bit. The memes, the quotes.
Yeah. It's interesting. I think my journey on social media has changed quite a bit. I
Hmm.
started in the sleep space, and I had started with like heavy psychoeducation about sleep because that's what people needed during the
Yeah.
pandemic. And I was having so much fun doing it. And then I started to pivot because I realized that not everybody is going to want to have deep, dark conversations about their mental
Oh,
health, about sleep. And I noticed that if it's in a meme form or it's in a laughable form, and then there's a little bit more information, that people might take it a little differently. So I do tend to post a lot of like sarcastic, funny things just to get people thinking about their mental health. And if that's the best that it does, then that's great for me. But I do get some feedback about that. People are like, "Oh, you're not being serious. You're not a professional." All this stuff, and it's like, well, how else are we going to reach people? It's hard.
yeah. I think, kind of when I started doing this stuff too, it was kind of taking it from the humor approach, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
From the comedy kind of aspect and then sneaking in the truth bombs in there, right?
Yes.
And that's kind of how like my reach got bigger and bigger over time a little bit. And then
Hmm.
I've kind of like, I don't know, I've pivoted recently to like more educational stuff, but I'm going to pivot back now that I'm back in my office that I've been kicked out of for the past 6 months. So in my safe space, I'm back in my safe space. So now I can get
Good,
back to
good,
like
good.
back to my good stuff, to original things. But it's the truth of it, right? Is that like, if we just put out purely educational things, right? It's an echo chamber, right?
Yeah.
It's just the people who want to hear it are gonna be, and they're gonna like take it, and they're gonna be like,
Hmm.
okay, cool, and they'll save it, and that's that. And then again, with the nature of like social media, like you want to drive engagement, you want to
Yeah.
provoke an emotion in this little snippet of time that you have from them, and then hopefully they're able to like share it and do whatever and give their LOLs and stuff. And
Yeah. It's It's so interesting because I think there's no right way to do social media in the mental health field unless you're being wildly and
Unless you're
grossly
wrong.
unethical.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's different. Crossing boundaries and crossing lines is totally not okay.
Mm.
But I do think everybody has something different to offer. I do have a couple of colleagues who are very, very, very pointed and psychoeducational and very serious, and I love their posts, and I think it's incredible, and it's great. And we share each other's stuff. But I do think there's a place for everybody in terms of delivery of these things.
Yeah. How do you deal like with that aspect of people who are, again, like coming after you a little bit, being like, why aren't you doing more serious stuff? Or why are you being quote unquote unprofessional?
Yeah, that's been a journey. So I've been on at least TikTok since November of 2020, I think, or October of 2020. And it really used to get to me, honestly. It would keep me up at night. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm doing something wrong. And then when I really think about it, when you get comments from your colleagues and stuff like that, that's different. Most of the comments don't come from my colleagues. They come from
Yeah.
lay people, because my colleagues can understand like the nature of what we do and all that. But I think about it this way. Well-adjusted people don't make fun of strangers on the internet. So I try to keep that in mind whenever I receive comments. I average about like 5 to 10 hate comments a day now.
Yeah.
So it's really, and I'm sure you've experienced something very similar. But I have to realize that people are probably doing their best. And if this is a way for them to express themselves, great. I'm just not going to internalize it.
Yeah. It comes to the point almost where like I put something out there and then I don't look at the comments, right? Because
Yeah.
it would become bad, right? It would become very
Consuming.
toxic. Yeah. And you know that like once you start responding or getting back in there, like it's just going to make things worse. It doesn't make it better.
No, not at all. Yeah, not at all. And I think if you're receiving feedback on a post from like multiple people and maybe it doesn't land the right way and
Yeah.
your intention was one way and impact is another, I always think that's something to consider too, which is great. But if we're just thinking about like user 698, whatever, with no profile picture, who's calling you unprofessional, it's like, I can't take that seriously.
It doesn't matter, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Talk to us a little bit about too, and so you just wrote a book. Tell us, here's your chance to shill your book a little bit.
Yeah.
Tell us about your book and like what that process was like and everything.
Yeah. So I wrote a book about insomnia.
Yeah.
It's called Insomnia Doc's Guide to Restful Sleep.
Yeah.
And
Link in bio. We'll put the link in the description.
yeah,
So,
thank you.
all
I
this stuff.
appreciate
We
that.
got you. We got
I
you.
appreciate you asking too.
Yeah.
So basically, there's so many sleep books out there, and I've read so many of them, and they're all great. I think the approach that I took was one of humor. I talk a lot about marginalized cultures and how they experience sleep and how it's different from white individuals and white experiences, because I tend to think that the premise of all the research about sleep and just research in general is an overwhelming majority of it is about white people. So
Yeah.
being a white provider in this space, I feel like it's almost like my ethical duty to like really look at the research and really capture the broad scope of things and deliver it in a way that people might be able to hear and want to hear. And basically with the book, I focus a lot on really, 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 really small habits that you can implement to help your sleep. It's not a fix-all, it's not therapy, of course. And the one thing that I talk about a lot is stress and how to manage stress and how that impacts sleep. But it was a really fun book to write. My editors let me write a bunch of stuff. I curse in there. It's like super fun. And it's also on an audiobook too.
Yeah. What was that? I mean, so it's a process, right? To like, did you ever think like you're going to write a book? First of all, of
Absolutely.
course.
I didn't even think I was going to graduate high school. Yeah. I didn't think any of this was possible. Yeah.
Yeah. And I know, like, I think I pulled it up and I was like, it's like 250 pages, right? So how the hell do you get to like writing something like this, right? What's the process? Yeah.
It's basically a dissertation. So Mango Publishing reached out to me and they said, hey, do you want to write a book? And I said, yeah, why not? I like didn't even think about it. Like probably not the best.
Yeah.
But we went back and forth, negotiated. And then they were like, what's your timeline? And I was like, I don't know, 6 months. And they were like so excited. And I didn't know why. I should have taken a year. Should have taken a year or two, but I've been thinking about all this for so long that it's like I've already done the research and all that stuff. So it was an easier process. But it was basically like a massive lit review. So just taking a bunch of research, making sure it checked out. And the process that I had was I would wake up at 5 or 6 in the morning. I would write for 2 hours and then see my clients. And I would just cap it at that because that's how I got through my dissertation. And then each chapter you send them and then they rip it apart. And then you put all the feedback in, which is great. I need it.
Yeah.
We all do. And then it ended up becoming what it was. And it's really nice working with a publishing company because they chose the cover, the title, like certain things and certain aspects of it that I would have never thought to put in the book. So it was really nice to collaborate.
Cool. Yeah, it's a process, right? It's not just something you can like be like, oh, let me just write a book and there you go.
Right. Yeah. It's way more in depth than I thought it was. I don't know if
Yeah.
I'd do it again. It was really fun, but yeah, it
Yeah.
definitely took a lot out of me.
Cool. Well, congrats on that. We'll definitely
Thank you.
put all that out there for people to get, and I'll have to order it too. So gotta
Thank you.
support the peeps.
Thank you.
Wrapping up a little bit. So, and I always ask people two questions when we're finishing up. What is your form of self-care? The buzzword self-care.
Yeah. I was going to say something different because I was thinking about this. And if I'm really being honest with you, it's not overworking myself. Like
Yeah.
it sounds so weird, but like not taking on any more clients, not hustling. I'm just done. Like I just can't
Yeah.
do it. Taking Fridays off. Like I
Yeah.
just don't care. It used to be like putting up boundaries, saying no, and all that stuff. But I really think if I'm being honest, there's such a drive that I have. I'm a Capricorn, so all I want to do is work and just
Yeah.
produce and do all these things. And I don't have kids, so I have the time. But it doesn't mean that I should be using my time that way because I just get burnt out.
Yeah. I think it's really nice when people, just say it straight up, like just working less. That is my self-care.
Totally.
Yeah. And it's one of those, like the hustle right now for me is like work a little bit harder now so I can work less later. But it's like, when does that come? Right.
Yep.
Never.
Yeah.
One day it'll come.
Seriously.
And the last one is, what is your favorite sneaker? Because we are to talk about sneakers too.
I love it. So I have these mint mid-top Nikes. I just moved into a new house and
Nice.
I've been trying to find them all week because I knew we were
Yeah.
going to do this podcast and I don't
Yeah.
have them with me, but I'll send you a picture of them. I am upset. I just love them so much. I'm obsessed with mid-top Nikes. Those are just my thing.
Nice. All right. Awesome. Well, congrats on the house in this economy.
It's crazy. Yeah. We put in like so many offers like for months. It was wild. And my husband's a real estate broker. I'm like, this is crazy. Yeah, it's just insane.
I have a brother-in-law and sister-in-law. So my wife's like brother and sister who are both in real estate. And we've been like searching for like 5 years. So, and I was like, wow, you guys are useless. All of you.
Right.
I was like, I love you guys, but you're like not helping.
What are you doing?
What are you doing here? Why am I still renting here and all this stuff? Like,
and
we're
they
trying
do so much work and they don't get paid until the house closes, right? It's like so crazy. Yeah.
I was like, what are you guys doing? You're not helping us out here. But any kind of other like take homes or anything else that anybody who's listening would like to, any kind of stuff.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I just want to thank you for being in this space. I know you and I connected on Twitter, but I've always felt you to be like a very safe person. I really love your content. I really think that you're doing great work and I really appreciate your podcast too. I binged a couple of episodes. So Thank you for the opportunity. And also thanks for being here. And then for people in the sleep world, if you're looking to get better sleep and you don't want to really spend any money, really just taking inventory of the things that stress you out. And if you don't have solutions, just creating time in your day to allow yourself to process those things. Of course, therapy is ideal. Not everybody has access, but if you just take a little bit of time to be intentional about your thoughts, it might help.
Yeah. And how can people who want to follow along with you connect with you and follow along?
Yeah. So I'm on TikTok, Twitter, YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram at Dr. Kristen Casey.
Perfect. We'll drop all those in there too. So Dr. Casey, it was a pleasure. I'd love to chat with some more, but we will get on with all that stuff. So thank you for being here.
Oh, anytime. Thanks for having me.